Wonderful,
Thank
you
you,
two.
Wallace.
Kia ora to you both.
And the
Sally-
pet shop boys would have done it more urgently, Michael.
Probably.
Good on you. I'm Wallace Chapman. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45. Checkpoint next. Sally, Michael, thank you very much.
Maybe I didn't treat you.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei. The striking nurses struggling to feed their families and pay their bills. Why aren't they worth as much as their hospital colleagues? Cocaine and MDMA for sale on Facebook, and the drug dealers targeting Queenstown on the dark web. The police join us with the details. The invitation Transport Minister Michael Wood is absolutely refusing. He explains why. We find out what Tuhoi's plans are for Te Urewera Huts. Tamati Kruger is live. And Auckland's Deputy Sheriff officially gets her badge. You can check us out live, Sky Channel 83 or Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Mārie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. A Plunket nurse with more than a decade of experience says many nurses are struggling to pay their bills. Primary healthcare nurses throughout the country have been striking for equal pay with their hospital counterparts. In an emotional speech to a rally in Auckland's Victoria Park today, the Plunket nurse said the government's use of inflation as an excuse not to increase primary healthcare funding feels like a slap in the face. She says the pay difference is leading to skeleton staffing and compromising the quality of care. The National Nurses Organisation delegate for Whānau Awhina Plunket, Hannah Cook, says it's the first time in 35 years that Plunket nurses have gone on strike.
No one at Whānau Awhina Plunket has had a pay rise in over 2 years. As we all know, the cost of living has gone up significantly. Hard decisions are being made, holidays are being sacrificed, eating a lot more vegetarian meals, those sorts of things to try and make that budget stretch that little bit further.
There'll be more about the strike with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint. The daily numbers of COVID cases are now at their highest since August. The number jumped by more than 60% from Tuesday to Wednesday, from 2,140 to 3,923. Delays in reporting because of the long weekend could be a factor in this, but the daily number remains relatively high today at 3,575. The Ministry of Health says it thinks that only about 55% of community cases are currently being reported. The police have swooped on a dark web drug ring in Queenstown, arresting 12 people. Detective Senior Sergeant Malcolm Inglis says cocaine, LSD, MDMA, cannabis, fantasy and other drugs were being sold in Queenstown Lakes and Central Otago.
People would be ordering off the dark web, getting the drugs into New Zealand and then on selling through the Facebook site.
Malcolm Inglis says it's a growing problem in the area, with online drug rings replacing the tinny houses of the past. Meanwhile, in Auckland, a machine gun has been seized, along with drugs, as part of Operation Cobalt, an investigation into a syndicate associated with the Headhunters gang. Detective Inspector Lloyd Schmidt says 23 15-gram bottles of GBL, or liquid ecstasy, were found at a Browns Bay property, together with LSD, methamphetamine, cocaine and cannabis. A Tech 9 submachine gun, ammunition and $25,000 in cash were also found. Legislation establishing an independent watchdog for the Defence Force has been introduced to Parliament. The creation of the post of Inspector General of Defence was one of the recommendations made by the Operation Burnham inquiry. Our political reporter, Annika Smith, has more.
The inquiry identified significant shortcomings in the way the Defence Force dealt with allegations of civilian casualties. As a result, incorrect statements were made in briefings to ministers and the public between 2010 and 2017. Defence Minister Peeni Henare says once the new post is established, anyone will be able to raise concerns about potential wrongdoing, and the office will have full discretion over whether to act on any allegations.
And in Australia, the highly publicised trial of a former political advisor charged with raping a colleague at Parliament has been abandoned. Bruce Lehrmann denies raping Brittany Higgins 3 years ago. This report from the ABC's Elizabeth Burns.
The court was convened early this morning when Justice McCallum revealed a juror had been found in possession of material in the jury room which was relevant but not part of the evidence. Jurors were told multiple times not to do their own research. The material was discovered by a sheriff tidying the jury room. The trial had run for 12 days and the jury was about to begin its 6th day of deliberations. Prosecutors will now have to decide whether to run the trial again.
To sport now, and Roger Tuivasa-Sheck has finally cracked the All Blacks starting lineup. The former league star has been named in the midfield for Saturday's test against Japan in Tokyo. He'll start at second five, while his Blues teammate Stephen Perofeta will also make his first appearance in the starting lineup at fullback. Veteran midfielder Anton Leonard-Brown has been named in the reserves for his first test in a year due to injury. Meanwhile, Black Ferns head coach Wayne Smith is shying away from suggesting they've picked their top team for Saturday's World Cup quarter-final against Wales in Whangarei. Co-captain Kennedy Simon will finally get some cup action, having been named in the reserves after missing the pool games because of injury. Smith says it's difficult to say whether the 23 players named constitutes their best side.
There really aren't any that we're not happy with, and we're sort of promoting the idea that if we get through this and we keep going, then selection's a process every week. And sometimes it's horses for courses, sometimes it's current form, but it's never over until it's over.
Former world and Olympic champion Grace Prendergast has announced her retirement from elite rowing. And Liverpool are through to the last 16 of the Champions League football after beating Ajax 3-0. Tottenham drew 1-1 with Sporting to go top of their group, but will need to avoid defeat by Marseille next week to qualify for the next round. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, find out how albatrosses and oysters are helping to fix the world. Herbs are in the spotlight with their 1983 album Light of the Pacific. It's one of Nick Bollinger's essential 100 New Zealand albums. And we look to the heavens with comet hunter and astronomer Alan Gilmore. That's all on Nights with Karen Hay after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
This is RNZ National. We're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday for northern and western areas from Northland down to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine and cloudy periods. Isolated showers, mainly during the afternoons and evenings. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mainly fine. A few showers about the Taradua district tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, often cloudy with the odd shower. Rain with some heavy falls developing from tomorrow afternoon. Mostly cloudy for Canterbury. Patchy rain spreading north this afternoon, then clearing tomorrow morning. Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain with heavy falls in Westland from this evening, then easing tomorrow afternoon. Otago and Southland, occasional rain, clearing tomorrow morning. Scattered showers tomorrow afternoon and evening, some heavy with possible thunderstorms and hail. For Reakohu, the Chatham Islands, mainly fine at first, rain developing tomorrow evening. The time is 6 minutes, in fact, coming up to 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines for you and traffic at 5:20.
Nā mihi Evie, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. They're struggling to pay their bills, put food on the table, pay for childcare and meet mortgage payments. That was the message from 4,000 primary healthcare and Plunket nurses across the country who took to the streets today in their fight to be paid the same wage as their hospital counterparts who earn between 10 and 20% more. Today's strike comes after the union rejected the government's latest offer of a 2.7% increase for primary healthcare nurses and a 3% increase for Plunket nurses. And as our reporter Lucy Sear reports, as the cost of living soars, many say they're struggling to survive.
That is the sound of about 70 nurses picketing at Victoria Park in the heart of Auckland, demanding fair pay. Primary healthcare nurses across the country are fed up with being paid significantly less than those working in hospitals.
It's really unfair that hospital nurses are getting paid a lot more than us.
We believe that we need to be paid as equally as the nurses out in the hospital.
We do the same work. The stress level is the same, the complexity is probably even more in primary health.
Nurses starting their careers in primary health earn starting salaries around $14,000 less than their hospital counterparts. In an emotional speech, a Plunket nurse with more than a decade of experience says many nurses are struggling to pay their bills. She says the government using inflation as an excuse to not increase funding to primary healthcare feels like a slap in the face. Another nurse who'd like to work full-time as a primary healthcare nurse says the pay makes it unfeasible.
I can't afford currently to pay my bills, cover the mortgage if I worked full-time in primary health.
She is now working part-time in primary healthcare and part-time in a hospital to make ends meet. Lynette Robinson, who works in a Dunedin medical centre, says nurses with young families are especially struggling.
Younger nurses with families and having to pay for childcare, that the pay levels at the moment are making things more and more difficult, particularly with inflation.
Meanwhile, Wellington nurse Vicky Peris says iwi community nurses are taking even a greater hit.
Our iwi provider sisters are paid less than we are, so the gap between them and Te Whatu Ora is around 25%, and that's not okay.
Meanwhile, the nurses' organisation says the unfair wages is causing nurses to leave primary healthcare, which means fewer services and longer wait times for patients. A nurse who works in a GP clinic in West Auckland says it took her clinic 9 months to fill a nursing position. Many nurses are concerned that the skeleton staffing in primary health is having negative flow-on effects for hospitals.
That's going to leave poor care in the community, which will mean that more of those who become ill in the community will end up in hospital.
If there were more primary healthcare nurses and well child nurses, then we would see less people sitting in EDs for 6+ hours.
Michael Brendorfer, a youth health nurse, says with the new fair pay agreement legislation, which covers Te Whatu Ora nurses but not primary healthcare nurses, the pay gap will be further widened.
That report from Lucy Sear. Let us know your thoughts on that, about the pay gap between primary healthcare nurses and Plunket nurses and those nurses that work in the hospital system. 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is 11 minutes after 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown has announced Councillor Desley Simpson as his deputy. Ms Simpson is the councillor for Orake Ward, which covers Mission Bay, Kohimarama, St Heliers and Remuera. Mr Brown says Desley Simpson was not only his pick, but has the support of other councillors.
She's highly regarded as a regional leader with a broad Auckland-wide perspective. She maintains the greatest support for her own community of any councillor on the governing body, having topped the poll with nearly 25,000 personal votes. Desley and I are going to be a great team.
Desley Simpson says it's a great privilege to be Deputy Mayor, and she believes her skills complement the Mayor's.
You're not short of knowing where the Mayor comes from. I suppose I'm naturally more conciliatory, would that be the word? Look, the way this is going to work is that His Worship is the Mayor. He has very obvious ideas and he's been quite articulate in those ideas, and I think it's my job then to help him populate those ideas around the elected members and find a consensus with everybody, really.
Wayne Brown says he will have more to say about which council-controlled boards he believes should quit once he's met with the full council. And as you heard there, Desley Simpson is the new Deputy Mayor, and today she confirmed there was an expression of interest made by a company to take over the operation of Ports of Auckland. Mayor Wayne Brown says any foreign operators would be wasting their time submitting proposals for a takeover. The Mayor wants some of the port land freed up for Aucklanders to enjoy, but he and other councillors are staunchly opposed to any kind of sell-off. Anai te kairi poata a Tom Taylor.
At a media stand-up this afternoon, Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown said he was unaware of any potential plans for a port takeover before this morning.
I'm not running a detective story, but it's not going to happen, so we'll move on to other things.
However, his newly named Deputy Mayor, Desley Simpson, seemed to know more about the situation than she had let on even to Mr Brown.
There was an expression of interest given to Council, and it has to go through a process.
Ms Simpson says the expression of interest is confidential and she can't remember when the council received it. Auckland councillors contacted by Checkpoint say they didn't know anything about talks of a potential takeover by Dubai-based DP World and Quebec-based CDPQ. However, Councillor Mike Lee says when he was chairman of the Auckland Regional Council, he often had to turn down similar proposals, including one from the Sultan of Dubai more than 10 years ago.
Dubai World was keen on trying to buy the ports of Auckland in those days, and I told the Sultan, thanks but no thanks. The people of Auckland want to keep hold of their assets, as I'm sure the people of Dubai do. So, no deal.
Mr Lee says selling the ports to overseas investors won't return any benefit to Aucklanders. He says he hasn't had an opportunity to discuss the ports with the Mayor as the council hasn't been sworn in yet, and finds it concerning that the potential proposals only came to light with a new council on its way in.
Clearly, these talks have been going on for some time, but have been kept secret. That's part of the problem I have with it. Rather like the secret blowout of the City Rail Link, these things have been kept away from the people of Auckland prior to the local government elections.
Councillor Wayne Walker says in the past, revenue from the ports of Auckland has been an important offset against the council's costs and has helped to keep rates lower than they would be otherwise. But there's no question in his mind that the efficiency of the port needs to be ramped up. Mr Walker says he can't comment on any potential sale of the port as there hasn't yet been any discussion of it around the council table.
There are a number of fairly complicated things that are at play here, and I don't think that we've had a particularly comprehensive look at the port and related issues generally.
Likewise, Councillor Daniel Newman says he hasn't had an opportunity to discuss the ports with the Mayor.
News of those discussions was news to me as well, and I would be very reluctant to see any discussion around a long-term lease arrangement which locks up that land.
National Secretary of the Maritime Union of New Zealand, Craig Harrison, says he was concerned to hear about the rumours of privatisation of the ports. He says despite a history of underperformance, the ports are now making progress.
The management team that's in the ports of Auckland now are starting to turn that port around. For instance, when Roger Gray went in there, they were averaging 7,000 containers a week. Now they're up to 9,000.
A Ports of Auckland spokesperson says the board does not have any meetings with DP World scheduled and says Chief Executive Roger Gray won't speak about it publicly until after he's met with the Mayor.
Tom Taylor there. Tūhoe says hunters and hikers will always be welcome in Te Urewera. 48 dock huts deemed to be past their use-by date are being dismantled. Trampers and hunters who've used the huts in the past say it's like ripping the heart and soul out of the place. But Tūhoe's promising much better facilities and a real visitor experience. Te Uru Taumatua looks after Te Urewera for Tūhoe. Ko taku manuhiria nai nei ko Tamati Kruger. Tamati is the chair of TUT and joins us now. Tēnā koe, Tamati.
Tēnā koe, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Can you just fill us in a little bit on this? How far off are the replacements for the huts that have already been dismantled?
Well, first of all, I'd like to start with huts being the heart and soul of Te Urewera. That's rubbish, isn't it?
Why do you say that, Tamati?
Well, people are the heart and soul of Te Urewera. Te Urewera has its own heart and soul, not a hut or a shed or a toilet.
So the hunters and trampers who use those huts, their concern over them going, well, do you place any stock in that?
Well, I think it's a valid point to sit down and talk about the replacements, sure. But I think to suggest that we continue to run Te Urewera with museum-type shelters and huts that becomes a memorial to what used to be in the 1950s and 60s is really not tenable. We should be all excited with what follows decommissioning, which is a brand new place, a cultural experience closer to Te Urewera with brand new facilities.
How far off will those replacement huts be, do you think, Tamati?
Well, look, we want to be able to consult with various people around a good fit design of it. We can do a quick job, but we'll rather do a good job. So I'm thinking that we would be wanting to do this between 2 to 3 years to get a proper design of these things.
So why?
But we are able to put in temporary shelters, temporary facilities that people can use.
So when will the temporary facilities go in there? Because I suppose one of the arguments is, why rip out the old ones before you decide what you're going to replace them with?
No, we have got temporary shelters that we can put in the next few months.
So deadline for getting those up and running, will they be in there by Christmas then, Tamati?
Yes, yep.
Okay. So do you think that, or what conversations or discussions did you have with hikers, hunters, people who use those huts before coming to the decision?
Well, our first duty is to talk and consult with Tūhoe people, remembering that the whole point, the whole moral objective of the legislation is the reconnection of Tūhoe with Te Urewera. We can't be bypassing Tūhoe people and then go and talk to trampers, hunters, and people who go boating and fishing. But nevertheless, we have talked with some entities that have been very close and very contributive to Te Urewera for the last 40, 50 years. We have made it a mark to identify who our close friends are, who are the ones that share the Tūhoe vision for Te Urewera, and we have done all of that consultation with them. There are others that as individuals or smaller parties use Te Urewera. We haven't got around to them yet. But look, we've been doing this for a long, long time, and these people have not expressed an interest in talking with us.
So, Tamati,
over the huts.
The close friends of Te Urewera that you did consult with, who were those groups?
Well, the Deer Stalkers Association, the Waikaremoana Boating and Fishing Club, the Friends of Te Urewera, Federated Mountain Club.
When you talk about a more authentic experience staying in Te Urewera, what will that look like once you complete your vision and have the new huts and accommodation in there?
At the moment, you yourself can bring one of your friends and go and walk around all of Te Urewera without you meeting one single Tūhoe person. That is not a cultural experience. That's a walk. So the cultural experience would be that in the future, that Tūhoe people will be hosting visitors, can host visitors who wish to contact and have friendship and relationship with Tūhoe people and get to know their daily life, where they go, what they do, what they eat, what they're observing, and how they commune with Te Urewera. And so that to me is more authentic.
So, Tamati, will independent hikers who maybe don't want to do that, will they still be welcome in Te Urewera?
Of course. So, these are people that want to come and take photos, want to have a personal, isolated experience with Te Urewera. Of course they do. We will be caring for their health and safety, and we would like to be able to usher them and advise them what would be the right places to go to and how to go about Te Urewera. But yeah, they're most welcome to do that.
We're almost out of time, Tamati, but people will want to know this, coming up to Christmas, hand on heart, are there going to be huts there for them to stay in if they want to go walking and staying in Te Urewera over the summer break?
Around the Lake Waikaremoana, all of the huts except one are available and will still be in use all through this summer. In the other areas, we will be able to offer some temporary shelters for those that need those. But we're going to be asking people, hey, bring your tent, sleep under the stars, sleep under the trees, get a real experience of camping and going out into nature.
Kia ora rā e hoa. That is Tamati Kruger there, who is the chair of TUT, who looks after Te Urewera for Tūhoe. It is almost 23 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai Kai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know what you think about that. The huts, the old duck huts that are going from Te Urewera. We heard there from Tamati Kruger there's going to be replacements. It's a 3-year plan, but they're going to put temporary huts in there. Some will be in before Christmas, otherwise you'll be camping under the stars. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Tuhoi wants you to have a more authentic experience. The email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And Evie's standing by with the headlines. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
In an emotional speech, a Plunket nurse among those demonstrating in Auckland has said the government's use of inflation as an excuse to not increase primary healthcare funding feels like a slap in the face. Primary care nurses nationwide are striking today for pay parity with their colleagues in hospitals. 12 people have been arrested in relation to an online dark web drug ring in Queenstown. The police say cocaine, LSD, MDMA, cannabis, fantasy and other drugs were being bought on the dark web, imported into New Zealand and then on-sold using Facebook. Legislation establishing an independent watchdog for the Defence Force has been introduced to Parliament in response to one of the recommendations made by the Operation Burnham inquiry. The inquiry identified significant shortcomings in the way the force dealt with allegations of civilian casualties. The Emergency Management Minister has met Nelson Mayor-elect Nick Smith today after Mr Smith called on the government for financial support following the August floods. Kieran McAnulty says while he can't make any promises, the government is well aware of the costs the region is facing. And the daily numbers of COVID cases are now at their highest since August. The number jumped by more than 60% from Tuesday to Wednesday, from 2,140 to 3,923. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, State Highway 1 in Otago, from Hawkesbury to Evansdale, a crash that was blocking the road near the Coast Road intersections has now been cleared and the road is just reopened. And in Auckland, expect quite a few closures across the motorway network tonight from 9 p.m, affecting many areas, including Ramarama, Esmond Road and Upper Harbour Highway. Our next news headlines and traffic is at about 5:40.
Kia ora rā, Evie. The Black Ferns have received an extra boost ahead of their Rugby World Cup quarter-final at the weekend. Co-captain Kennedy Simon is yet to play at the tournament but is set to make her return after being named on the bench for Saturday's match against Wales in Whangarei. Here with all the selection news and more is sports reporter Clay Wilson. Clay, what stands out about the Black Ferns team that's been named, and are we just going to smash Wales?
Well, you mentioned Kennedy Simon there, and great news for her. She's the 32nd and last player from the Black Ferns to finally get on the field. She's been injured since their test in Australia a few months ago, so great news for her and a very good player to be bringing off the bench, and perhaps might see her start next week if they can get through this game. Just one change in the forwards. It's really the backs where you look at this team and the names jump off the sheet. You've got Ruahei Demant, the other co-captain, she's coming back, Kendra Cox-Edge at half-back, and then the sort of back five, if you will, the midfield, Stacey Fleur, Teresa Fitzpatrick, Ruby Tui, Portia Woodman, all players that have come from that Sevens program that are just very, very dangerous players. And then the only player not to play Sevens in that back five, Aisha Lethiainga, who is just a destructive presence. So it's when you look at those names, you see how dangerous this Black Ferns team can be. So to answer your question, yes, the Black Ferns are going to be heavy favourites to win this game. They put they beat Wales by 40-odd points in the pool play. But Wayne Smith has certainly not been preaching that to the players. He said he's reminded them how the forwards sort of got ran over a little bit in moments of that Wales game. And he told a story about 2007 when he was coaching the All Blacks against France. They beat them by 50-odd points here in New Zealand, and then most of us will know what happened in the 2007 quarter-final against France. So just a little reminder about what can happen, not to get complacent against a team that you've beaten handily in a previous match.
Because you could be weeping into your cereal the next time round.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, apparently there's another team that's also playing on the weekend. What's the deal with their lineup?
Yeah, so the All Blacks team's just been named this afternoon. Of course, a lot of players not available for various reasons, 7 players. So just 6 players that played in their last match, which is the second Bledisloe test a couple of months ago, have been named in this team. What really jumps out, Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. A lot of talk about him not getting much opportunity in the Rugby Championship. They've taken this opportunity to give him a start, and also his Blues teammate Stephen Perofeta is going to start at fullback. A few others there that have got a start that might not have otherwise, perhaps, if if some other players had been available and this had been a bigger test, if you will, the likes of Dane Coles, Hoskins Sotutu, Shannon Frizzell, Finn Christie and Braden Ennor, some names that I picked up. And also some news on the bench. Anton Leonard-Brown, he's been out for 6 months or so, had shoulder surgery, so he's been named in the All Blacks team for the first time in about a year to come back. So this test this weekend, of course, preparing for the big matches to come in the UK, which starts next weekend with Wales and Cardiff.
Oh, well, you'll be able to watch that game during the breaks in the Black Ferns,
That's
Clay?
the plan, yeah.
Clay Wilson there with sport. An international drug ring pushing its wares in Queenstown via Facebook and the dark web has been busted. A dozen people have been arrested after police infiltrated the operation that was selling so-called party drugs, including cocaine, MDMA and LSD. Among those arrested were foreign nationals from France and Chile, and they faced deportation. One patched mongrel mob member was also arrested. Police say the group thought it was flying under the radar online until Detective Senior Sergeant Malcolm Ingalls says their cover was blown.
We had been, over the last few months, became aware of a internet-based drug dealing network on Facebook, which we were able to monitor and become involved with. And through that, we were seeing large quantities of drugs being dealt with in the Queenstown area, either by dealers or by persons purchasing drugs through the internet.
What kind of drugs are we talking about?
Cocaine, LSD, MDMA, cannabis, fantasy. A full gamut of drugs, really.
I mean, how overt was it?
Not that overt. It was difficult for us to access, but we were able to do that in the end. Obviously, most of these sites are closed. We're aware that most of the drugs were being purchased off the dark web to enter New Zealand. And through some pretty good work by staff, they were able to establish who the suppliers of those drugs were.
Can you just explain this to me in a little bit more detail? Were the drugs coming in offshore and then being sold by someone using Facebook?
That's correct. That people would be ordering off the dark web, getting the drugs into New Zealand, and then selling through the Facebook site.
So have you made a number of arrests?
We have made 12 arrests in relation.
So the people you have arrested, are they the alleged suppliers or were they purchasers?
Not all of them, but most of them were suppliers of drugs through the net. As I related to, in the past it used to be tinny houses. Now we've moved on to, more sophisticated methods of distributing drugs.
How widespread do you reckon it was?
Well, I think it's very widespread. And it won't be the only site that's on the internet, so we're certainly hunting out other sites where similar things are occurring.
I know you won't want to give away all your secrets, but how did you click onto it?
It really, by good work, we heard the information that there may be one of these sites working within the Queenstown area, so good detective work, staff went out hunting and managed to find the site. And from then it just built, really.
What were you noticing in terms of circulation of drugs in your area then as a result of this operation?
We know through our wastewater, Queenstown per head of population has the highest consumption of MDMA in the country. So that was one of our focuses, to look at where these drugs are all coming from. And we were pretty aware, not just this operation but others we've conducted. MDMA comes off the dark web, gets imported. It's a very good money maker for dealers. And so that's, it's been an ongoing issue for us here in Queenstown.
What kind of value are you talking in terms of the drugs, and did you actually seize product?
Yes, not a huge amount of product. We have seized some throughout the operation, seized about 10,000 in cash. Varying amounts we could track over the internet coming into the country all the time and into Queenstown. We've had preview operations, we've had 2 litres of MDMA arriving. We're aware of ounces of cocaine arriving, but it's like a rolling door. You can do 3 or 4, 5 or 6 importations, smaller ones, over a period of time. So not big amounts, but if you do numerous imports, builds up to be big amounts.
And through the post, detective, or how was it arriving?
Through the post, other methods. We're aware of one shipment got intercepted in Canada. We believe it was coming in a dehumidifier. So lots of different methods.
And where from? Place of origin?
Canada, Europe. Countries are limitless, really, wherever they can get it the cheapest and available on the dark web.
So what's the deal with Facebook then? Have you had a chat with them?
Oh, they've been cooperating with us. They don't want illegal activities on their sites. We're certainly talking with them.
I'm curious, do you think that they have adapted in the way that they are selling and putting this product out? Is it post-COVID this sort of stuff is starting to be sold in this way?
Well, that's a good question, but there are numerous secure internet sites now that this can occur on, and it's pretty safe. Well, they think dealers think it's safe because they may not know the person, but they have to try and get on these sites somehow, so they believe them to be legitimate, drug dealing sites. And so it's rather no need for a face-to-face meeting until the product changes hands.
And Detective Senior Sergeant Malcolm Ingalls says they've targeted sellers rather than users, and they can put users in touch with addiction services if they want and need help. It is 27 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa inaine, ko Nona Peltier, who's bobbed into the studio with a bounce in her step. OK, Nona, let's talk about New Zealand's biggest bank. Which one is that? ANZ. And they've got a mighty record full-year profit.
Yeah. So the underlying cash profit is up 8% to over $2 billion. The net profit, which is the absolute bottom line, it's up 20% to $2.3 billion. And that's for the full year. So a lot of people say, gee, that's a lot of money. Why are they making so much? So I asked...
Lending?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of reasons for that. They had part of the year was buoyant when the housing market was still going gangbusters. Things have changed a bit. It's a bit softer now. And I spoke with the chief executive, Antonia Watson, this morning. And look, she says, yes, we did make big profits, but it has to be seen in context. And I have a bit of that interview for everyone to listen to.
And it's important that you put profits in perspective, I think. So, number one, it's a really good time to be a strong and safe bank because we've definitely got some dark clouds on the horizon, so we're well set up for that. So that's one of the really pleasing things about the profit. But the second thing is, just in terms of the number, it's a big number, but we are a very, very large company. We've got 10 times the capital of Spark. We've got $200 billion of assets in New Zealand. So profitability as opposed to profit, our returns are around 13%, and that's middle of the road for sort of top publicly listed companies in New Zealand.
And that's Antonia Watson, putting in context her big profit.
Middle of the road, she says, for big international companies. Let's see what our listeners and people using the bank think. 2101 on text. What are your thoughts on that profit? Middle of the road or not?
Well, there you go.
And Nona, Sky City. Oh, yeah. I see what you're doing here. Sky City being burned again. This is more fallout from that fire at the International Convention Centre, right? 2019.
Yeah.
Gosh, quite a while back now.
It seems a long time ago, but for the Sky City folks, it's something that they're having to continue to battle with. So what happened was, people will recall that fire went on and on and on, and the basement filled with water where they had all these new car parks. Well, they had sold the concession to an Australian firm, and that was to operate the car parks. And they had until last week to hand over those car parks for operations and were unable to. So the company, Macquarie Wealth, has pulled the plug on the deal, leaving Sky City to come up with what I guess, look, it's a $220 million deal that they no longer have. So that's not the end. We're going to be hearing some more. It's Macquarie Principal Finance, as a matter of fact, not Wealth, that had bought that concession. So it was 3,200 car parks still underwater, or I guess maybe being still cleaned up. It was a messy deal, wasn't it? Anyway, so we haven't heard the end of that one.
Okay, Nona, shall you take us for a spin around the market?
Yeah, well, I want to say that Sky City's share price fell 1.1% on those news, and ANZ, despite that very big profit we just talked about, down 3.6%. And that's because the outlook is for dark clouds, as you know. So the NZX Top 50 Index, though, it ended up 0.5%, 54-point gain to 11,101. And the Kiwi, trading at 58.4 US cents. I know. It's up there. It's, I think, what did it say? More than a month. Best number for over a month. Yeah. 89.9 Australian, so a bit in the doldrums there, and 50.3 British pence, which almost never changes.
Yeah, that's for sure. Thanks, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with business news. Let's get to some of your feedback now. A number of you getting in touch about our earlier interview with Tamati Kruger from Tūhoe. This is about Te Urewera and the removal of the old dock huts there. This listener says it's the nostalgic old huts that people love. Why remove them all at once? Leave them till the new facilities are commissioned. I'm sure they will have charges and profit making. Years without facilities, double handling, this person says. Tramping huts are a safety thing. Another listener says it's not about a cultural experience. How many people will die? Hey, lay off Tūhoe, this person says. If they want to keep people out of their land, then that's their mana whenua right. No doubt they will also use Pākehā property law, build their own whares and charge accordingly. And someone else says, great plans, Tūhoe, fantastic, will come. And another listener says, I worked for DOC and it's very expensive maintaining backcountry huts. Everything has to be flown in by helicopter. John says, how could Tamati possibly expect to get building consent for the proposed temporary shelters before Christmas, let alone erect them? Well, he did say you may have to tent in some sites and temporary shelters in others. Not sure whether those temporary shelters will even require building consent. Alice says, those huts are iconic. I love them. They are simple, basic, communal and retro. She says she spent many years tramping to Urewera. I'm now a grandmother and would like to take my grandchildren there also. Please keep some, says Alice. Another says, Tamati Kruger is a terrific bloke, but I have absolutely no interest in learning about Tūhoe, nor do I feel any urge to meet them. I simply want to walk freely over the land that actually belongs to every New Zealander. This insistence on forcing Māori culture down our throats is wearying. It's just not that interesting. Get over yourselves, Tūhoe, says Glenn from Karori. Glenn, actually, I think you might have misread Tamati there. He says that experience will be available to people who want it. You will be free to walk without participating in a Tūhoe experience. You can use the huts without doing that. He says each to their own. It is an offer that they are making to people. And Mary's got in touch to say, kia ora, Lisa, the plans for connection to the people of Te Urewera and experiences in the park sounds perfect for me. I recently went online to see if there were such guided trips. None. I tramped the Whakatane River Walk in the 80s. Fantastic rustic huts, but I was much younger then. I think at the time there were Tūhoe iwi assisting paid groups of workers setting up camp in Kai. They used horses to get from A to B. That experience is exactly what I want now before I get too tricky. Ngā mihi nui from Mary. Do keep feedback coming 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. You are, of course, listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Your feedback is always welcome, homai or whakaaro. As I said, text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or we do love a good old-fashioned email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie is here with the headlines. Anaya Evie, mina pita pita kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. The Foreign Minister says the government is engaging at a range of levels to try to recover the body of New Zealand soldier Dominic Aberlin, but says that its efforts may be unsuccessful. Since Corporal Aberlin was killed in Ukraine in August, his body has been in Russian hands. Emergency Management Minister Kieran McAnulty says he's receiving daily updates on the flood recovery in Nelson, Marlborough, Northland and Buller. The minister met with Nelson Mayor-elect Nick Smith today to discuss the region's recovery. Passengers travelling on the Celebrity Eclipse cruise ship say there have been no official COVID-19 protocols communicated by the crew. The ship arrived in Christchurch's Littleton Port this morning. Australian passengers John and Karen say there are sick people on board, but it's not known whether they have COVID. The Tūhoe governance entity, Te Uru Taumatua, is defending plans to demolish backcountry huts in Te Urewera, saying the wider public has been misinformed. About 200 people protested the settlement body's plans for the former national park yesterday. Te Uru Taumatua chair, Tamati Kruger, told Checkpoint it's not tenable to keep maintaining old and failing huts, and it's exciting to be replacing them with brand new facilities and a cultural experience closer to Te Urewera. And Germany's coalition government has agreed on a plan to legalise the use of recreational cannabis by adults. If the change is made, Germans will be able to buy up to 30 grams of cannabis for personal use from licensed outlets. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, no major delays to report around the country. There are a few closures across Auckland's motorway tonight, the entire network from 9 p.m, affecting many areas including Ramadama, Esmond Road and Upper Harbour Highway, so you might want to check with Waka Kotahi before you travel. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Thanks, Evie. Climate protesters blocking a Wellington motorway this morning were denied their chance to speak to politicians because they were breaking the law. It's the latest in a string of protests from this group this month, with 3 more arrests today, taking the total to close to 30. Kate Green has more.
Do not come down, you will be arrested.
For the past 3 weeks, the message from activist group Restore Passenger Rail has remained the same. Protester Rosemary Penwarden says a better passenger rail network is urgently needed to lower emissions and fight the climate crisis. 3 members of the group climbed onto a gantry above State Highway 1 just after 8 o'clock, with a sign reading, "Michael Wood, we need to talk." The road was closed southbound for close to 3 hours, and northbound for the second part of that. Rosemary Penwarden says it was necessary.
If you're a piece of coal in the South Island, you can travel almost anywhere by train, but you can't as a passenger.
The group was set to speak on Zoom from their protest position at Parliament's Transport and Infrastructure Select Committee this morning. But National MPs Simeon Brown and David Bennett staged a protest of their own, with Bennett saying it would set a dangerous precedent.
We are effectively supporting their illegal behaviour, and I think that's a precedent that this committee does not want to set.
The group slot has been pushed back to the 10th of November. Andrew Geddes is a law professor at the University of Otago and says select committees in the past have decided not to hear submissions in breach of the law, including submissions containing information suppressed by law.
This is slightly different in that the protest group were trying to make their protest a part of their submission. And it's really arisen, I think, because of select committees' preparedness to hear people remotely.
This opens up the possibility for people to make their method part of the message.
So that does require the select committee to ask, whether it should, in essence, allow its venue to be used to allow that protest message to be heard, one that's in breach of the law, and the select committee's decided in this case, no, it won't.
Back on the motorway, it was 11 o'clock before the protesters were brought down. Police removed them from the gantry with the help of a crane. 3 people were taken into custody, and the road reopened shortly after.
And the invitation has been extended to the Minister. We need to talk. So does he plan to sit down with the protesters as requested?
Who think that their way of making progress is to make threats and disrupt thousands of people around some of our biggest cities. That is not a way to invite someone to a meeting and have good faith dialogue. So no, I won't be responding to those sorts of threats. That would set an appalling precedent for ministers, MPs and other decision makers if people think they can shut down motorways to get a meeting. I meet with other groups who are advocating for passenger rail on a regular basis and have productive dialogue with them. And I'll do that with any group that engages in good faith. This group is not.
Are you a bit grumpy with the Minister?
On behalf of thousands of people around Wellington who have had their lives disrupted, I am. I think that these actions are dangerous. They are not acceptable. And actually many people who have been advocating for better public transport and better passenger rail agree with me that these actions are counterproductive. They're not serving the cause of these people. Many of us are working to try and improve passenger rail. This is just making people angry.
So counterproductive, why? Because they're annoying all the people driving to work in their cars?
Well, counterproductive because their way of trying to advance their issue is to create enormous inconvenience and frustration for people just going about their ordinary lives when there are other avenues to engage. So as we speak, Labor MPs have set up a formal inquiry into passenger rail at the Transport Select Committee. And there are people coming, submitting, putting their ideas on the table in this area. There are other avenues open to be addressing this issue. As I say, I meet with other groups who are advocating in this area. We're considering their proposals. This group came along to Parliament 2 weeks ago, handed over a letter and said, do what we want or we'll disrupt Wellington. That is not a way to engage in good faith, and I don't think it's appropriate to reward that sort of behaviour.
Do you not think they have some legitimate points?
I'm as keen as anyone for us to make progress on better passenger rail in New Zealand. We're the government that's invested in the Te Huia service to restore passenger rail between Auckland and Hamilton. We're putting more money into the Capital Connection. I'm open to other proposals and having those dialogues. So, yeah, there's a good point there that more passenger rail is a good thing, but let's have the dialogue in a mature way instead of making threats.
What do they need to do in order for you to sit down at a table with them and have a chat?
Stop these dangerous and aggressive actions that are causing such inconvenience to people in Wellington.
So how much time would have to pass where they don't stage another protest in order for you to meet?
Well, this group doesn't get special treatment. Thousands of people want to meet with ministers about key issues. If they stop these actions, I'll give full consideration to meeting with them in a reasonable way alongside the other people who want to talk to me about these issues. But I'll do that in a good faith way.
Speaking of public transport, Auckland at the beginning of this week, trains, mass delays, right? And still hundreds of bus cancellations every day. Is this good enough?
Well, no. I'm a regular public transport user and these things are very frustrating. We had some points failures in particular on the rail line that caused some of those disruptions on the Western line in Auckland. That speaks to the fact that we need to get on top of decades of deferred maintenance. That's why we have a record program that's going into the network as we speak. In terms of the bus issues, that is primarily down to shortages in the driver area. I will be having some announcements coming up fairly soon that will speak to that issue. But the core issue is that for 20 plus years, under the public transport operating model, we've had a race to the bottom. Bus drivers have been poorly paid, treated poorly, and as a result, we don't have enough drivers. We're getting on top of that problem now.
So Auckland Transport has said it's making some schedule adjustments to the buses in the next few weeks. That seems to indicate that they're going to cut services. I mean, what's good about that?
Well, obviously, if services are being cut, that is not a good thing. That's why we need to make sure that it's an attractive area of work for people to come in. Bus drivers do enormously important work. As I say, they've been part of a race to the bottom. That's why we're bringing in fair pay agreements. That's why our government is investing $61 million.
But Minister, this looks like it's going to happen regardless. They've provided us with a statement saying they're making schedule adjustments. They're going to announce them in the next couple of weeks. Given there are shortages, it seems logical that these schedule adjustments are going to be a cut in the schedule. I mean, is that really a way to encourage people onto public transport, cutting services?
Obviously, cutting services is not what we want. We're a government which has invested more across public transport right across the country. We want to see more services. I haven't seen Auckland Transport's particular proposals. That's up to them as the local authority who run public transport. But we'll do what we can as government, and we are doing what we can as government to invest across the board in better paying conditions and drivers and decarbonising our buses and more operational funding for public transport. That's the work that we're doing as government, and we'll support Auckland Transport and other councils to try and get these services running as frequently and reliably as possible.
This imminent announcement that you say you're making, Minister, is it going to change those schedule adjustments? Will it offer relief that quickly?
Well, the running of schedules is always up to local authorities and public transport
Understand that, but what you're announcing, will it make a material difference to the situation they find themselves in?
I believe it will make a material difference. As I said at the budget, the government is allocating $61 million to lift bus driver terms and conditions, and I'll be getting further details about that.
Hey, the services that cut down the sign from State Highway 1 on the gantry, did you ask if you could keep it? Who's got that billboard?
Look, I imagine that the police took care of that situation. No, I haven't asked for that as a souvenir.
And that was Transport Minister Michael Wood. It is 10 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A Richmond fish and chippy owner who's also a sought-after dog tracker has a few good takeaways when it comes to finding your wayward canine. Don Schwass does work for Nelson Land Search and Rescue, but separate to that, he's built a reputation as the guy who can find missing pets in some pretty dire circumstances. Most recently, he was on the trail of 2 golden retrievers AWOL from Hanna Springs. He found them almost 2 weeks after they disappeared, and Don joins us now. How do you do it?
I suppose it's just experience, just, practice and practice. Practice makes perfect. Yeah.
I suppose people want to be found. Do dogs necessarily want to be found?
Oh, well, that's a really good question. I think that deep down they do, but they're definitely not as probably as precious as us in the sense that they don't experience what loss is. They're out there following their nose, I guess, living the dream.
And in all seriousness, what kind of techniques are you using? Do you use a dog yourself? I mean, how do you go about finding a dog that's just disappeared?
Yes, I use a dog myself. I've got an 18-month-old lab cross called Piper. It's all about tools in the toolbox. We use a thermal drone. That's a new addition. Also, my tracking skills. And if you put them all together and you search an area and you use my tracking skills, the dog and the drone, that means it's been checked 3 times. And I know where to put the dog best to try and get the better result. It's sort of, it's been working for us, so we're doing something right.
Yeah, tell us about the latest rescue or find with these 2 golden retrievers.
Oh, yeah, no, I got called up a week ago by Vicky in Hamner, beside herself that she'd lost her 2 dogs, and said, could I come down and when could I? And I said, I said I'd be down there tomorrow if I could, but with work commitments and stuff like that, it took me probably another good week to get down there, which is not the best thing to do, but she followed my instructions and did what I asked, and we turned up there a week gone last Monday, Tuesday, and searched for, I planned to search for 2 days, and within 24 hours we'd found the 2 missing dogs, really.
And
with
how
help
far
of the locals as well. Yeah.
How far had they wombled off, Don?
Oh, as the crow flies in a straight line, it's probably only 2 kilometres, but, where they've been over that entire time, huge area. It leads into the Molesworth from the back of Hamina, and look, they could go anywhere they want. Really, the average dog trots along about 4 kilometres an hour, so, they had a long time.
Hey, I know you don't get paid for this, so what's in it for you? Do you get great joy out of this, or how do you feel when you reunite a person with their dog?
Oh, look, that what you've just said is the exact thing what I get out. Whether it's a person or a dog, when you see that family reunite, the emotion, the tears, a dog to a dog owner is family. It's like a child. And it's no different than reuniting a family just with a lost family member, and the emotion's pretty high. It's pretty strong.
Yeah, I bet. Hey, thanks for joining us, Don. That's Don Schwass, who's a tracker, does work for search and rescue, but also in hot demand separately as someone who can find your lost dog. For the first time in 11 years, Ōtautahi has welcomed a cruise ship. No large ships have docked in Lyttelton Harbour since the earthquakes destroyed the previous berth. More than 200,000 passengers and crew are set to stop off this season, bringing an estimated $260 million to the local economy. Reporter Neva Chittick and cameraman Nathan McKinnon headed along to welcome the party.
The Celebrity Eclipse's passengers were enjoying being out and about in Lyttelton today. English couple Susan and Brian say Christchurch's Port Hills remind them of home.
New Zealand, lovely place. It looks just like the Lake District in England.
And
fantastic,
Scotland.
absolutely.
Yeah. And Scotland, very much so. Yes, it's been wonderful.
Civil and naval bartender and Lyttelton local Jesse says he's enjoying seeing new faces.
More people in Lyttelton, that's good. And I mean, it's a port town, so you should expect that kind of stuff, right? Much like the Sail GP, it's like, there'll be a few hiccups, a few things go wrong, but there'll be more people in port.
Alana works at Henry Trading and says there's a buzz in the air, but she says not everyone is keen.
Mixed reviews around the town. Yeah, it's always pretty interesting. I mean, it's been so many years. I haven't worked in Lyttelton having a cruise ship in, so it's quite interesting. Being in here, we've had, a lot of people.
Banks Peninsula Councillor Tyrone Fields says the environmental impacts of cruises is weighing on some locals' minds.
People are concerned about the well-being of our local Hector's dolphins population. People are concerned about the impact on the seabed. People are obviously concerned about the impact on cruise ships on climate change as well. So that really has to be balanced out. But at the same time, we've got this beautiful harbour here, and we've got this beautiful country where people want to see, and we need to manage those two things together.
COVID is also now part of the kōrero after a different cruise ship destined for Lyttelton, Ovation of the Seas, confirmed it has over 100 positive cases on board. Passengers docking in Lyttelton today, John and Karine, say there have been no COVID protocols communicated to passengers from the Celebrity Eclipse crew.
There's a few people isolating because they might have something, but there's been no official announcement at all, so everybody's just doing their own thing. But if you sit next to someone and you sneeze, they'll go and sit in the next cabin. Next deck.
Move away. Yeah, everyone's taking mild precautions, put it that way.
Being careful, being sensible.
However, they did say crew members were wearing masks. Celebrity Cruises declined to comment on whether there was COVID cases on board Celebrity Eclipse. In a written statement, they said a robust, tiered response plan is in place that's been developed with guidance from local authorities and leading public health experts. Christchurch Mayor Phil Major says he has faith in their COVID protocols.
Because they're in such close quarters, because a long time ago went on about you're on close quarters and things like that can spread reasonably easily, not like a plane, you're on and off. But I think from what I hear, the systems they've got in place there are going to keep it well under control, I hope.
He says the return of large cruises is something to be celebrated.
Let's get to some of your feedback, and a lot of it coming in on all sorts of issues on the subject of public transport and buses. This person says, as a regular bus user in Auckland, I would rather have schedule changes instead of last-minute cancellations because of a lack of drivers, and they're in Arch Hill. And someone else says it should be compulsory for all council staff and representatives and politicians to use only public transport for work purposes. I'd bet we'd get a much improved service, they say. On the huts in Te Urewera, Simon's got in touch to say, while I love the park and was shocked with the initial way Tūhoe were obviously making a point with the way they restricted access, as Pākehā, I wholeheartedly believe tangata whenua deserve the right to control the land and access how they see fit. Redress, people, says Simon. On the subject of nurses and the different pay rates, this is between nurses in primary care working for Plunket and those in the hospital system. Strikes today from primary care nurses. Chris says, hospital-level nursing is far harder and more stressful with the grinding stress of antisocial hours. That is why they are paid more. When hospital-level nurses can take no more stress, they often accept the income drop and transfer to primary care. Chris goes on to say, if the pay rates were made equal, a large portion of the hospital-level nurses would move to primary-level care and the hospitals would collapse even faster. All that aside, all nurses are grossly underpaid, and that is why they are leaving the profession and the country. And someone else also says, do they really do the same job as hospital nurses? My mother's care in hospital was completely different to what she got from the medical centre nurses. However, I am happy for both sectors to earn a lot more. Someone else says the nurses should have equal pay, but shift work nurses should get an extra loading to acknowledge that toll.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening. I'm Evie Ashton. Some primary healthcare nurses say they can't keep up with the cost of living on the money they're being paid, and it's driving some of them out of the profession. 4,000 primary healthcare and Plunket nurses went on strike today, demanding the same wage as their hospital counterparts. Starting salaries in primary health are about $14,000 less than what hospital nurses start out getting. An Auckland nurse who'd like to work full-time in primary healthcare says the pay is preventing her from doing that.
I can't afford currently to pay my bills, cover the mortgage if I worked full-time in primary health, so I combine with hospital work where I get a higher hourly rate.
The government's latest offer of a 2.7% pay rise for primary healthcare nurses and a 3% one for Plunket nurses has been rejected. Auckland's new mayor, Wayne Brown, says he's unaware of foreign offers to run the city's port. The New Zealand Herald has reported that 2 foreign operators are interested in taking long-term control of the land. Newly appointed Deputy Mayor, Desley Simpson, says she knows an expression of interest was made by DP World, but she couldn't recall when. Mr Brown says he didn't know of the offers and it's not something he was considering.
No, I didn't know that at all. Absolutely not. But I know that around the world, various cities have entered into those things and regretted it later on. And so, no, I didn't. I had no idea there was a live chat going on.
Wayne Brown says the council will never agree to selling port land or entering into a long-term lease. The Foreign Minister says the government is engaging at a range of levels to try to recover the body of New Zealand soldier Dominic Aberlin. But she's reiterating that its efforts may be unsuccessful. Since Corporal Aberlin was killed in Ukraine in August, his body has been in Russian hands. The body of Joshua Jones, an American soldier who died alongside him, is now being repatriated. But RNZ understands Corporal Aberlin wasn't included in the body exchange. Ms Mahuta was asked today if New Zealand has asked the US for help.
Look, we're responsible for our consular cases. I'm confident that as we engage at all levels, we're exploring every avenue that we possibly can.
Nanaia Mahuta says the situation is challenging and difficult. The Emergency Management Minister has met with Nelson Mayor-elect Nick Smith today for a briefing on the area's recovery from the August floods. With a likely repair bill of up to $60 million, Mr Smith has called on the government for financial support. Kieran McAnulty says while he can't make any promises, the government is well aware of the costs the region is facing.
Whenever there's been a natural disaster elsewhere, the government has provided support where it can. If we think back to the flooding in Marlborough in July 2021, there was a significant support package from the government for that council. The same for Buller, and those conversations are underway here in Nelson. It's just a process to follow, and we'll just let that play out.
Kieran McAnulty was also in Nelson for Shakeout, the country's annual earthquake and tsunami drill. In the United States, a second woman has come forward saying a prominent Republican candidate for the US Senate pressured her to have an abortion. Backed by Donald Trump, Herschel Walker is standing in Georgia on a strongly anti-abortion platform. The BBC's Emma Vardy reports.
Herschel Walker is a well-known name in America because of his legendary sporting status. His stance on abortion has been unequivocal, opposing it in all circumstances. But he's faced repeated claims of hypocrisy as two women have come forward alleging that he paid for them to have an abortion. The second woman spoke over Zoom directly to reporters at a press conference, claiming Herschel Walker had pressured her into ending her pregnancy and drove her to the abortion clinic. Herschel Walker has denied the allegations, calling them lies.
Youth Law and the Children's Commissioner say students need the protection of a school disputes panel, and the delay in setting one up is unfair on young people. The government changed the law in 2020 so a disputes body could review decisions like stand-downs and exclusions, but has yet to set it up. Education Minister Chris Hipkins says the government is committed to setting up a disputes process, but spending decisions are subject to the budget process. Youth Law and the Children's Commissioner say without a panel, young people and their families are virtually powerless to contest decisions that can have a life-changing effect. The Auckland Council wants residents to stop tipping the contents of aquariums into waterways. Goldfish and pest plants have shown up in waterways because of the practice. Contractor Peter Wilcox says the fish grow quickly, threatening native species.
It is a huge mistake because it causes huge problems. A goldfish that might be worth $10 in a shop all becomes thousands and thousands of dollars expense for the councils trying to manage it.
And Peter Wilcox says the largest goldfish he's caught was 40 centimetres long and the heaviest about 1.8 kilos. That's the news.
Hi, this is Phil O'Brien. Coming up this week on Saturday Night Requests, music from The Holly, Al Green, Tony Childs, Jamiroquai, Steve Earle, The Chemical Brothers, Al Hunter, Joe Cocker, Johnny Cash, Steppenwolf, Neil Diamond, The Drifters, Alice Cooper, Dire Straits.
We wanna get a statement from Jesus say it's like a talker to the wall.
So much good music. Saturday Night Requests from 7 on RNZ National.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northern and western areas from Northland down to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine and cloudy periods. Isolated showers during the afternoons and evenings. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mainly fine. A few showers about the Tararua district clearing this evening. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller. Often cloudy with the odd shower. Rain with some heavy falling falls developing from tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury, mostly cloudy with patchy rain, then clearing tomorrow morning. Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain with heavy falls in Westland from this evening, then easing tomorrow afternoon. Otago and Southland, occasional rain, clearing tomorrow morning. Scattered showers tomorrow afternoon and evening, some heavy with possible thunderstorms and hail. And for Re Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, rain developing tomorrow evening. It's 6 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Now, Mihi, Evie, before we crack on, 1.8 kilo goldfish, I don't want to cause a stir, but can you eat them?
That would feed a family for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and way cheaper than the old snapper, which was like $50 a kilo.
Possibly
or something.
available at a stream near you.
Yeah, I don't know. Someone let us know. 2101. Is that on PC? Or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ.
It's sustainable, that's what it is.
Are goldfish edible, the ones that get big and are released into the wild? Anyways, moving on. Police are still trying to trace the family of a tourist who died in Arrowtown over Labour weekend so they can send his body home. 51-year-old Wai Ming Lai, who was visiting from Hong Kong, was on a hiking trail at Sawpit Gully when he was found. But so far, there's no clues to where he was staying most recently or where he left his bags, and no one has reported him missing. Detective Senior Sergeant Malcolm Ingalls says they have his passport, but not much more.
We know he arrived in New Zealand on the 27th of July, and his movements around New Zealand are unknown. He was found on the Sawpit Gully walking track on Saturday around 8 o'clock in the morning in a bad shape, really. He was struggling to breathe and was going downhill. Past his other walkers administered first aid CPR, but unfortunately he died at the scene. He was carrying a passport, but that was about all. And since then, which is now over 5 days, no one's reported him missing or not returning to his accommodation, where he must have been staying in the area somewhere. So we've been unable to track down relatives in Hong Kong. We have our liaison officer in Hong Kong working on that. So we know nothing about Mr. Lai, really, or his movements. We're still waiting for an autopsy to establish cause of death. But we'd just like to, obviously, have his family aware of what's happened and look at repatriating his body to Hong Kong.
Detective, that's a little bit unusual, isn't it? Because presumably he would have stayed somewhere locally, or if he has been here for so long, he would have had accommodation or crossed paths with someone who would remember him?
Yeah, that's what we're thinking. Luckily, with our press release that went out this morning, we have been contacted by a motel in Wanaka who had him staying there a week ago. So that's been really helpful, and it advises that he was using bus transport when he was in Wanaka and was carrying a large silver suitcase. So we need to try and track down where that might be and his other belongings and just start to put the jigsaw puzzle together, really. So
there is somewhere else you are assuming he stayed in between the accommodation that's contacted you?
Yes, we know he left Wanaka early last week, so he's been somewhere in between. He's presumably staying somewhere in the Wakatipu Basin, and we just need to find that location, what he's been up to, etc. We knew he was due to leave the country on the 18th of this month, but didn't board that flight.
So he arrived in New Zealand from Hong Kong in July, you say. Is that his normal residence in Hong Kong, or was he transiting through there?
No, Hong Kong is his normal residence. He flew into New Zealand from Hobart, so we know he'd been in Hobart prior to arriving in New Zealand. We're trying to make inquiries to see if we can establish anything from there as well.
And internationally, are you speaking to your counterparts?
Yes, we are. We've got a liaison officer in Hong Kong, so we've been speaking with him, and he's trying to make inquiries there as well.
How unusual is this for someone, not to have any obvious connections?
Well, reasonably unusual. We knew he was due to fly home on the 18th, so no one's reported him not arriving back in Hong Kong on that date. Certainly no one's advised that he hasn't returned to accommodation here, or his suitcase must be still there. So we're just really still slightly in the dark as to his movements and where he has been staying.
What do you hope that suitcase might reveal to you if you're able to find it?
Well, there might be some documentation, something in relation to his background. There might be anything that links him back to Hong Kong, is our hopes. We certainly still need to establish the cause of death, which has been worked on, and just give us some more of a picture around Mr. Lai.
How can people help you?
Well, just the photo of him's out there in social media and in papers. If anyone's had contact, if he stayed at their accommodation with him, and any background around his movements would be extremely helpful.
And that's Detective Senior Sergeant Malcolm Ingalls, and we'll put the photo of Mr. Lai on our web page. They really need help from people locating his movements prior to him being found. The Australian men's football team has spoken out about Qatar's human rights record just weeks before the World Cup kicks off there. Socceroos players have released a 3.5-minute video saying they felt compelled to speak about the issues surrounding Qatar's hosting of the event.
Over the last 2 years, we have been on a journey to understand and learn more about the situation in Qatar.
We are not experts, but we have listened to groups such as Amnesty, FIFA, the Supreme Committee, the International Labour Organisation, FIFPro, and most importantly, the migrant workers of Qatar.
We have learned that progress has been made both on paper and in practice. The kafala system has largely been dismantled, working conditions have improved, and a minimum wage has been established.
Whilst the reforms established in Qatar are an important and welcome step, their implementation remains inconsistent and requires improvement.
We have learned that the decision to host the World Cup in Qatar has resulted in the suffering and in the harm of countless of our fellow workers.
These migrant workers who have suffered are not just numbers. Like the migrants that have shaped our country and our football, they possess the same courage and determination to build a better life.
As players, we fully support the rights of the LGBTI+ people. But in Qatar, people are not free to love the person that they choose.
Addressing these issues is not easy, and we do not have all the answers.
We stand with FIFPro, the Building and Woodworkers International, and the International Trade Union Confederation, seeking to embed reforms and establish a lasting legacy in Qatar.
This must include establishing a migrant resource centre, effective remedy for those who have been denied their rights, and the decriminalisation of all same-sex relationships. These are the basic rights that should be afforded to all and will ensure continued progress in Qatar.
This is how we can ensure a legacy that goes well beyond the final whistle of the 2022 FIFA World Cup.
One that football can truly be proud of.
One that football can truly be proud of.
One that football can be truly proud of.
One that football can truly be proud of.
One that football can truly be proud of.
Meanwhile, the Danish football team has announced they'll wear shirts at the World Cup that criticises Qatar's human rights record. They have added a black playing shirt to honour migrant workers who died building the stadiums for the World Cup. Russia's strategic nuclear forces have held nationwide drills, increasing tension with the West over the war in Ukraine. The drills, involving multiple practice launches of ballistic and cruise missiles, follow President Vladimir Putin's warning about his readiness to use all means available to fend off attacks on Russia's territory. The ABC's Barney Porter reports.
In the village of Nevske in western Luhansk, a special forces soldier throws a Russian flag on the ground and hoists a Ukrainian one. Glory to Ukraine, he says. The fighting is continuing on multiple fronts. The southern city of Mykolaiv has endured repeated strikes by Russian forces. 73-year-old Valentina still lives there, but has to sleep in an air raid shelter. Every night there are strikes, she says. Every night we'd lie down and count 1, 2, 3, how many blasts there are, and then we'd read on our phones where it happened. Russia's strategy has shifted from simply attacking military targets, instead destroying Ukraine's infrastructure ahead of winter.
It's simple genocide of population.
Vitaly Klitschko is the mayor of Kyiv.
Putin needs Ukraine as country without Ukrainians. And that's why right now try to let the people in winter time without electricity and heating. It's genocide of people.
And the threats of escalation are continuing. Overnight, President Vladimir Putin monitored exercises by his strategic nuclear forces to simulate a massive Russian strike in retaliation for any nuclear attack on Russia. Right from the start, he says, Ukraine was turned into a testing ground for military biological experiments. And now no one's talking about Ukraine's desire to get a nuclear weapon. And they're also planning to use the so-called dirty bomb as a provocation.
President Putin's nuclear rhetoric is dangerous and it is reckless and irresponsible.
The NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg.
Russia now falsely claims Ukraine is preparing to use a radiological dirty bomb on its own territory. NATO allies reject this transparently false allegation. Russia often accuses others for what they intend to do themselves. We have seen this pattern before, from Syria to Ukraine.
Mr. Stoltenberg was speaking during a visit to a US aircraft carrier taking part in a NATO exercise in the Adriatic Sea. He's also addressed the implied threat of a nuclear exchange.
Any use of a nuclear weapon in Ukraine will fundamentally change the nature of the conflict. President Putin, Russia, knows that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. And they also know that there will be severe consequences.
As winter approaches Northern Europe, there's clearly no sign of a thawing in tensions.
It's 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. In just 2 weeks, the US midterm elections take place and what will be a major test for Democrats in the White House. Control of Congress is up for grabs, including the Senate, which is currently split 50-50. One of the key issues is the Supreme Court overturning abortion rights. The BBC's Sarah Smith has more from Michigan, where the battle for women's rights continues.
Tim Drager often uses his private plane to fly cancer patients to hospital.
Clip up!
Now he's volunteering to transport pregnant women from states which have banned abortion to places where they can terminate a pregnancy. In Michigan, abortion is legal for now. Across the US, 13 states have severely restricted abortion, some with no exceptions for rape or incest. And it's become a major election issue.
What does it say about America when people see what's been happening to abortion laws in some states?
You know, we're the country that espouses freedom. We say we have freedom of choice for a lot of things. Here, I have to use that same freedom to help women find the freedom that they deserve, that they've had for 50 years. They should have that freedom everywhere, and that's what I hope we can push.
At St Mary's Catholic Church, politics have now made their way into the pews.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and
Here
of
in
the
Michigan,
Holy
there is a
Spirit.
special
Amen.
proposition on the ballot, asking voters if they want to guarantee abortion rights for women. And the priest is organising the opposition.
It is one thing to kill a person, but to kill one's own child is another dimension of evil.
For anti-abortion advocates as well as pro-choice campaigners, abortion is central to this election campaign.
It's really not that difficult to see on at least a grave moral issue like this one, what you need to do and how you should vote. We think the fundamental right is not abortion, but life.
The right to access an abortion was overturned by the Supreme Court in June. And now the battle over what the law should be is being fought out state by individual state.
Why is it a right to kill your own child?
Abortion has to become unthinkable. People have to really realize what it actually is. And I think people that are for abortion don't really understand.
We've lost the whole idea of life is sacred. I mean, that's a gift from God.
Abortion has always been one of the most divisive issues in America. But this is the first time in almost 50 years that voters can have their say. In states like Michigan, huge numbers of women have been registering to vote, vastly outpacing new male voters. And that's because this year, abortion rights are specifically on the ballot.
Thank you for what you're doing.
As Democrats organise their campaigns, they're focusing on reproductive rights. Instead of the rising cost of living, they would much rather warn voters about the strict abortion limits many Republicans advocate.
To go to a total ban that doesn't have any exceptions for rape or incest, that says if you're having a miscarriage, you have to wait until you're deathly ill to get a procedure. That is not something we're going to allow here, because it rolls us so deeply backwards.
Lead us not into temptation.
Anti-abortion activists have been campaigning for decades, and it's long been an issue Republicans could use to rally their base. But now it could cost them votes.
Our body, our choice, our body.
The furious backlash to the removal of abortion rights is energising large numbers of voters who are determined to make their voices heard in the polling booths.
The Chinese government has been accused of using some of its foreign diplomatic facilities as outposts to try to silence Chinese critics. The BBC's Anna Holligan explains.
Flourishing vines are creeping up the red brick wall, white net curtains billowing behind open windows on the upper floors, and just in front of me there's a red, blue, yellow, green floral Chinese-style ceramic vase on the windowsill. This 4-storey house, 10 minutes walk away from Rotterdam city centre, was listed in the investigation as being used by Beijing as a secret police station involved in carrying out persuasion operations designed to coerce those suspected of raising their voices in opposition to the Chinese regime to return home. One dissident said he'd been pursued by Chinese police from this location and subjected to a campaign of harassment and intimidation orchestrated, he believes, by the Chinese security apparatus. I've spoken to 5 separate people living in the next door apartment block, and all of them said they didn't know who lived at this address and had never seen the residents. But I've heard people talking inside and seen someone at the window, so I'm just going to ring the bell and see if they'll talk to me. I can hear it buzzing inside. Just give them a moment. No sign of movement. Why does this matter? Well, the real concern here is that such operations subvert national law enforcement and put dissidents, refugees and other groups at risk by circumventing national jurisdictions and the protections they offer. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has responded to the Dutch allegations. A spokesman, Wang Wenbin, said they were untrue and that what had been described as police stations overseas are actually service stations for Chinese citizens abroad, and China fully respected other countries' judicial sovereignty. The Dutch Foreign Ministry told me the failure to declare any such policing operations through the diplomatic channels with the Chinese government is illegal. The Dutch authorities are now investigating the nature of the alleged activities, which may or may not be happening behind this turquoise, net-curtained front door.
In a sensational twist, the judge has aborted one of the most high-profile rape trials in Australian criminal history. The jury has been discharged in the trial of Bruce Lehrmann, accused of sexually assaulting Brittany Higgins in Parliament House in 2019. A juror had obtained material that was not included in the trial. The ABC's Elizabeth Byrne has more.
Well, today, the jury in the trial of Bruce Lehrmann, who's accused of raping Brittany Higgins at Parliament House, has been discharged, and the trial, which has run for the last 12 days, and then we've had 5 days of jury deliberation, has now been aborted after it was discovered that a juror might have conducted their own research without considering just what was in court. The judge gave us a pretty full explanation as to what had happened. Apparently last night during a routine tidy-up, one of the sheriffs knocked a folder and something fell out of it, and it was an academic paper about a subject that was related to this trial, but was not material that had been put to the court. Now, the jurors are told at the outset that they are not to conduct their own research. It's a fairly standard jury instruction, and that juror was brought into the court at some point this morning. We were all thrown out. It was a closed court, and then a few minutes later the judge brought everyone in, including the jury, and said that they would be discharged and the trial would be aborted. But it's not sure yet that there will be a retrial. The Director of Public Prosecutions will have to make a decision about whether they will run the trial again. I guess Brittany Higgins will have to think about that as well, whether she wants the trial run again. Brittany Higgins was actually in the court, and we could see she shed a few tears, and then after a little while she got up and left.
Staying in Australia, the massive flood clean-up in northern Victoria continues, with some residents unsure if they'll be able to get their homes back to a livable condition. The ABC's Gavin Coote reports.
There are layers of silt and muck to clear out on this street in Mooroopna, which backs onto the Goulburn River about 5 minutes outside Shepparton. More than a week after the flood, Jason Jackson is taking one day at a time, trying to get his house as clean as possible before the assessors come in.
Went through the floorboards, so basically the walls, the floor, a little bit of furniture. We're pretty much waiting for all the, it all to dry out and wait for the insurance company to get back to us and see what's damaged and what's not. There's a lady who's put us up with all the animals and the child and stuff like that, and she's been lovely. I'm pretty sure we're going to be there for a month or two. We've got to wait for all the inspectors, the builders, everybody to come through to see if the house is condemned okay to be living in or if it's not.
So it's still a bit unclear whether it's going to be livable?
Pretty much, and who knows if this rain keeps coming, we might get flooded again.
While the family is grateful to have short-term housing elsewhere, his partner Simone Oliver is still trying to work out what items she can keep and what will need to be thrown out.
And then also storing stuff that is that we can salvage as well. That's another thing as well. So,
yeah, what have you been able to salvage? Because there's a lot of appliances I notice you've piled up outside here.
That's pile two.
Yeah,
that's the second pile.
The second pile, yeah. Once pile's already been taken. Not a lot. My son's cot, drawers, beds, couches, all gone. Yeah.
And how's your son doing? It must be a pretty confusing time.
It's really confusing, and he doesn't really understand because he's 3. He doesn't really understand what's going on. He just knows there's a whole lot of water. Yeah, I've tried to keep a little bit of normality, but, it's very upsetting for him, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but does he come?
Where did the water come from?
Yeah, from river.
From the river. And what did it do? Did it go in our house?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's staying in the house. Yeah.
Yeah, we're staying in a new house.
Like that.
And while it's now a bit of a wait to see whether the house can be repaired, they now have fans and dehumidifiers all through the house. But it's going to take time to get everything dry.
So I'll show you through.
Yeah. How many dehumidifiers would you have running through here?
There's 2, and then the fans, I wouldn't even know. I think there's one in every room. This room got hit as well, but it's the only place we could store our stuff.
While he's thankful the house is insured, Jason Jackson says the car, which got swept up in the floods, isn't.
Water in the exhaust and stuff, so maybe you can just replace that before I kick it over.
There's going to be a shortage of housing as well, but cars, I imagine that's a whole nother challenge now.
Yeah. It's a couple up Main Street and stuff like that, fully flooded cars. So unless you're insured for this, a lot of people are going to lose out.
And that's all we've got time for this evening. But ko te kaupapa tuatahi o Pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m, you will not want to miss this on First Up. To croc or not to croc. First Up's Leonard Powell discovers that few topics get people more riled up than the versatile rubber footwear. Crocs, are you for 'em or against 'em? Man, this is going to be controversial. Get your feedback ready now. 5 a.m, you do not want to miss it. Kei te hoki mai anō o Pōpō whānau pō Māori, eh? Catch you there tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Health Minister says he expects pay parity for primary healthcare nurses will be resolved by the end of the year. Auckland's new mayor says he's unaware of foreign offers to run the city's port. The New Zealand Herald has reported that 2 foreign operators are interested in taking long-term control of the land. And the Foreign Minister says the government is engaging at a range of levels to try to recover the body of New Zealand soldier Dominic Aberlin. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Heat in the Commons.
The only time he ran in a competitive election, he got trounced by the former Prime Minister, who herself got beaten by a lettuce.
Inflation pressure in Australia.
Inflation is public enemy number one. Inflation is the dragon we need to slay.
Fair pay legislation here.
It's one size fits all and it's compulsory, and that's our fundamental objection. It's not fair pay agreements, it's mandatory union deals.
Politics, local and international on Morning Report. Weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Time now for the detail. What makes a successful protest and how do you win others over to your cause?
The right to protest is fundamental to any functioning democracy.
Well, the capital city and indeed many cities around the world have been beset by protest recently. Demonstrations taking place by Extinction Rebellion activists are to be expected in some 60 cities over the next fortnight.
I'm never, ever going to say that people shouldn't be able to express a view in New Zealand. I'm never going to stand in opposition to the idea of protest. But I do draw a line when protest moves into violence, when it moves into illegal activity.
But some protests resonate better than others.
There is soup on the walls of an art gallery, but it's not Andy Warhol this time.
Well, it's Just Stop Oil activists who have thrown soup on Van Gogh's painting, The Sunflowers. You may have seen it on Twitter. I have. It's pretty pathetic.
So what does make a protest good or successful? What makes a protest bad? You know, making people angry, getting them to pay attention. Is that an end in itself? Or is it more important for protesters and organisers to put thought in, to figure out ways to win others to their cause?